Hey everyone, this is Fabio and welcome back. Today we're going to do a game discussion video. I'm very excited because I finally finished a game that I wanted to finish in a long time. And in order to do this, we're going to go to memory lane, since the game we're talking about, it's actually old. It's very old, but it's, as I said before, a game that haunted me for a long time, because I've owned this for years now, and I've played this multiple times and always failed to finish it because I've got a defective copy. It's not working properly, but as I explain later, it allowed me to finish the game, but it required a lot of patience. Not because of the game, because the game was fantastic, and that it's none other, I'm so happy, none other than Final Fantasy V, as you can on the Game Boy Advance, so Final Fantasy V Advance. And originally, this game was released in 1992 on the Super Famicom only, contrary to Final Fantasy IV and VI on the Super Nintendo age, that both of them, contrary to this, were released to the West. I never understood why, but who knows how these things worked back then. But today, there are plenty of ways to play this game, actually. Plenty. There's no excuse to anyone saying, well, the game was released in Japan, I could not play it, because it was released on the PS1, like 1999 in North America, 2002 in Europe, was released on PSN in 2011, on Game Boy Advance in 2006 and 7, and finally on iOS, both iOS and Android in 2013, so very recently. And it's interesting that that version, the iOS and Android, is actually the remake that I suppose most people actually wanted. And it's a bit disappointed that it was released on those systems, even though more people will play it maybe, but originally the remake, and I saw some pictures on Google and it's really good looking, especially like the character sprites, the drawing and everything, it's very good. But originally this remake was planned for the DS, then it was like, it skipped it for B, released on the 3DS, and finally decided, oh fuck it, we're playing on iOS and Android. I would have preferred a physical copy of that remake, but what can you do? We never understand how these companies work. I mean, they're so just doing whatever the hell they want. I mean, they don't care about us. I mean, I would have buy a physical copy of Final Fantasy V on 3DS immediately, but because I will not play the iOS version now that I finished the Game Boy Advance version. But back to this version, Final Fantasy V, it's considered a very underestimated game. It's not a hidden gem, of course, because it's a Final Fantasy game. It doesn't count as hidden. But compared to other games, it has this reputation of the big game that it's always been underestimated. And probably the main reason, at least for me, but it makes sense if you think about it, it's because it's squeezed between two great games, very famous one, Final Fantasy IV and VI. But it's also far less known than other games. For example, to me, far inferior games like Final Fantasy VII and VIII are much more famous than V. But again, the reason why, to me, first of all, originally was only released in Japan. That's a good reason to ignore the game for a while. And then its release was kind of limited and was only mainly ports, and it's mainly like on like the definitive version, to me at least, if you exclude the iOS and the Android remake, it's the one on Game Boy Advance. It's portable and it's the complete game with some additions, but yeah, I mean, it's so weird that this game is considered not secondary in the grand scheme of the Final Fantasies, but still many people. I was talking on Facebook on the old school JRPG page. So many people always comment that game is so good but underrated. I mean, it's obvious that many people played, of course. I mean, it's Final Fantasy, but still, it fascinated me that it's so hidden. But to me, it's just because it's squeezed between two of the greatest games of all time, 4 and 6. So, and the main reason why it's a bit ignored, it's because contrary to 4 and 6, it's a game that does not rely on great story. Final Fantasy V, excuse me, it's famous mainly for its gameplay, which so far among the Final Fantasies that I played, and played a lot of them, although not all of them, it's one of the best, as we will explore later. But the story that it's not criticized, but at least pointed out as not as deep, correctly, not as deep as 4 and 6, it's kind of simple, since you can consider Final Fantasy V the big brother of Final Fantasy 1 and especially of Final Fantasy 3, because both these games are Final Fantasy games that focus their attention on gameplay rather than story, and while improving both the job system and trying to give some more deep to the story, even though at the end of the day it's basically the same. There are the 4 crystals, a big evil coming, and it's up to the 4 heroes of light, the 4 crystal bearers. Just say that, it reminds me of the horrible Wii game. The 4 heroes who are chosen by the crystals are up to stop the evil. What's the story of Final Fantasy V? Briefly, but basically it's the one I just told. There are these 4 main characters, 5 technically. Bartz, the main protagonist, Lenna, Faris, Galuf, and later you're joined by Krillin, who are the chosen ones, and who are chosen to use the power of the crystal to stop the evil entity called Exdeath, who is returning to the world and trying to obtain the ultimate evil power to destroy the world or something like that. That's it, basically. So it's really a return to form of Final Fantasy 1 and 3. Like Final Fantasy 1, the 4 heroes are chosen to gather the powers of the crystal to stop the evil, what's his name, Garland or something like that. Final Fantasy 3, the 4 heroes are chosen to gather the crystals and fight the big evil. It's basically the same, just there is something more in Final Fantasy V to me. The story is not as bland as you can think, or as you can heard. Yeah, it's not as deep as Final Fantasy IV, for example. That game has such a great story. Like, it doesn't have the same character development, it doesn't have the same interaction between the characters. Like, there's nothing like a complicated relationship rivalry, like the one between Cecil and Kain, for example, or the development of a character like Cecil, or the same thing with Final Fantasy VI. There's nothing like that. But there's something. I think in terms of story, this game is much better than both 1 and 3. And it has some issues, especially I think there is some character development here and there, not with Bartz, not with the main character, although he's not my least favorite Final Fantasy protagonist, because yeah, he's kind of bland, but he's much less annoying to me than more recent protagonists, let's put it this way, like Tidus or Vaan. Protagonists, as I said, because we can discuss that a lot. And Bartz is just like this free-spirited young man traveling the world, adventuring, blah blah blah. Nothing special, but it is okay, even though it's not very interesting. To me, the best characters are, of course, Lenna and Faris, because of the relationship between them, and it's the only way that the game can show some character development. it's a start. It's something, because I really like these characters, especially those two. While Galuf and Krille also are not bad. We're getting it. It's like this is the right path. You could do something more, but it's not bad. The only really bland and boring character is Bart, which is like he's your protagonist, but you will expect this from Final Fantasy V, especially like nowadays. Like back then, maybe it was more not really shocking, but a bit surprising after the deep story and characters of Final Fantasy IV having these kind of bland characters. I mean, even though Len and Faris are much better developed compared to the others, they're not, as I said, Cecil, Kane, Rose, or Rydia. They're not. But still, for Final Fantasy V standards, and compared with 3 and 1, they're good characters. But Bart's really not. So, the story, and let's talk about the main villain a little, Exdeath, because I didn't mind him. I read somewhere like he's one of the most boring or forgettable Final Fantasy villain. Not really. He wasn't that bad. Yeah, it's the usual evil one who wants to destroy the war, but sounds familiar. Basically, all the villains are like that. If you want really complex one, of course, there's Kefka, or shit, I don't remember the main the villain from Final Fantasy IV. Completely forgot his name. Oh well, whatever. Or Kuja from Final Fantasy IX. I mean, there are much better villains, but there are worse ones as well. Like for example, and since there are similar games, the main villain in Final Fantasy III, that's a boring villain. Exdeath should have been explored a bit more, but it was okay. I mean, it's not the worst Final Fantasy villain to me at all. I mean, just like all the characters, this is the main. It's not a complaint because I knew this before playing the game years ago, but the main thing the Final Fantasy V needed to do, or should have done to improve it, but that wasn't what they were trying to me. So it's like having more characters, first of all, because you just have 5 main characters. Like, compared with 4 and 6, that's nothing. And also having like deeper character development, because, as I said, Len and Faris are good characters with interesting development, but that's certainly not enough for an entire game to have just those, because also Galuf and Krille, their development is even smaller than Len's and Faris ones, because I don't know, spoiler, it's not really a spoiler to say that Galuf is Krille's grandfather, it's not a secret, but it's not very deep. Just after what happened to Galuf, Krille is kind of lonely, blah blah blah, but that's just kind of basics. But at the end of the day, that's not the main reason to play Final Fantasy V, because if you want stories, you got 4 and 6. Just on the Super Nintendo. You got 9, another amazing story, and others. The main reason to play Final Fantasy V is, of course, the gameplay. And it's, to me, one of the best gameplays of the entire series. It's based on the job system introduced by 1, improved by 3, and perfected in this game. And after finished this, but even after playing for the first time, I loved it. And now that Dimensions is available, since a while now, I really want to play that game now. But let's go with order here. It's so easy going with tangents, following these tangents with Final Fantasy, talking about Final Fantasy games. The job system in Final Fantasy V, it's really well done. It's perfection to me in terms of job system. It's probably, I don't know, Dragon Quest VI also has a really good job system that maybe it's not really better. I think makes the game a bit easier because if I remember well, in Dragon Quest VI you can keep all the abilities that you learn while improving a job. When in Final Fantasy V, you can choose only 2 when you're going back as a freelancer. But that allows you for a lot of customization, of course. For example, my party, I kind of balance it very well. In fact, like the final battle with Neo Exdeath was really easy for me. I mean, it was not easy, but I think that I balanced my party very well in terms of like offensive and supporting characters that I managed to beat him without losing once, and also by keeping all my party members alive. And that's something for a final battle. I mean, it's the final boss of the game. But I balance very well. For example, I focus bards mainly on physical damage, so I develop classes like warrior, samurai, gladiator especially, while Faris, I kind of develop her as well as a physical fighter, but also with red magic in order to support. And also Krille, she was mainly a white mage, time mage, so I can have both white magic and time magic, while Lena was mainly a black mage summoner, so I can use black magic and summons, since I managed to find all the summons of the game. So it was very well balanced, and with one exception, I never had problems, or at least not too many, with bosses. The only boss that I couldn't do it was Omega, but that's an optional super boss, and it's not necessary to beat the game. But at the same time, while these were the main jobs that I really wanted by the end of the game, in the meanwhile, I developed so many others just to learn the skills or trying to find what jobs I really wanted. And for example, I trained Faris in so many classes like Dragoon, Ninja, so I can use the dual wielding weapons, the dual wielding skill, plus the red magic. So she was really strong. She can attack twice, and she had red magic. So she was a really well balanced character. Like with Bartz, as I said, I developed him as a knight because I wanted the two-handed ability, as a gladiator for the finisher, so it did so much physical damage, even without using like the finisher skill. But as you said, there's so many combinations you can do. It's just up to you what you want to do, what kind of focus you want to give to your characters. Like, I think it's essential to have at least one white magic character because you need white magic. But other than that, it's just pick a class, any class. You can do whatever you want, and that's a great thing. Like, your party might be, and probably will be, completely different from mine, but you're going to have a great time as well, because these job systems are so addictive. I mean, once you start getting into it, I think there's no turning back. They are so addictive because you want to like push a little bit further. It's the same thing with this addictive game. It's mainly because of that. You're getting addicted to grind. You want to grind more jobs. So maybe sometimes I ignore the game even for an entire week because I want to do something else or I didn't have the time. But even for like 10 minutes maybe, I try to grind one job level or just some ability points to increase that job. It was the same thing with Dragon Quest VI, for example. The only time that I decided to grind in these games were exactly like towards the end, basically, just to grind job levels. Final Fantasy V, I decided to grind a little, like some levels, and especially job levels, right before entering the Void, which is the final part of the game. Like, the final 10% of the game. It's the void. But before that, I never really needed to grind, because overall I didn't find the game really challenging. I mean, of course, boss battles or when you have to face summons are not easy. Like, one of the most frustrating one was the battle with Odin, for example, since you have to beat him in like 1 minute. That was really frustrating. But apart from that and the super bosses Omega and Shinryu, the others were really manageable, I think. It's not a very difficult game. It's well balanced, I think. So the main reason to play the game, it's of course the gameplay. That is excellent. It's really, really good. And as I say, it's one of my favorite Final Fantasy in terms of gameplay. Maybe at the end of the day, I prefer more typical Final Fantasies like 4 and 6, but the gameplay in 5 was so good. And also, another thing that I love about the game was, of course, the soundtrack. I bought this a long time ago. It's not new. And this soundtrack by Uematsu, it's fantastic. I prefer this to the soundtrack of Final Fantasy IV. There are so many good themes, and this fucker right here is the reason why now I've played and beat Final Fantasy V. Because as I told you, I own this game. I bought this game years ago now, but I never finish it. Basically because this other fucker, this cartridge is defective. It has a problem, a really big one. Basically, every time, because I play with the DS, my Game Boy Advance games, every time I turned off my DS, this one erases my save files. So every time I turn off the DS, I have to restart the game all over again. And if you are towards the end of the game, you don't want to do that. So the first time I played it, I decided, oh, screw that, I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep my DS turned off all day. Like, it was like a matter of pride in a way. I was like, oh really, you want to play that way? Well, I'm going to turn off my DS and keep it on all day. And I did it once, but by the time I reached the third world, I really wanted to play something else, because at the time the DS was my only console, so it was Final Fantasy V or nothing. So I had like DS games and Game Boy Advance games I wanted to play. Nowadays, things are different because I have a PSP, I have a PS Vita, so I have plenty of options. So when I was tired of Final Fantasy V, I just play something else. In the meanwhile, like, I played and beat The Walking Dead, Gravity Rush. My PSP, it's like broke, so I cannot play it, but I'm playing Final Fantasy IX on the Vita, so plenty of options. So it was not a problem keeping the DS on and just ignore it while I was kind of tired of it and continue it whenever I wanted. In this way, which is really weird playing this way. Like, I kept my DS on for maybe 2 months or something like that. It was such a great moment when I turned off the DS after I saw the end, because I knew that when I turn it off, it will erase my entire file. But I said, I don't care, I beat the game. So now I can finally play Etrian Odyssey and Golden Sun. These were the games that my DS was waiting in line after Final Fantasy V. Now that I beat this beast, I can finally move to something else. But as I said, it's all because of the soundtrack that I tried again, and this time continue this marathon until the end. Simply because now, as I said, a couple of months ago or something like that, I don't really remember, but it's been a while now. I was coming back home from the gym. I was very tired and everything, and I usually listen to my iPod, the shuffle on my iPod, which sometimes can be very dangerous because I have everything you can imagine on that. Maybe first I was listening to some Killers, then you have game music, then you have Mozart, then you have Metallica, then you have game music again. That's my iPod. It's very weird like that. So, and all of a sudden, Lena's theme started, and as I said, I really like the soundtrack of Final Fantasy V. And when I listened to that music, I said, "Oh, I really like this theme." I listened to it, and I listened to more Final Fantasy V music. And then the revelation. It's been a while since I played Final Fantasy V now. Maybe I should try it again. I remember about the problem with my DS card, but my Game Boy Advance card, but why not? Because I really want to finish that game because I really like it. It's the first time I played it. And so here we are. The rest of it's history now. Because of a song, I played this game in this really peculiar way, but for me it was the only option other than buying another card that I really don't want to because they're kind of expensive the last time I checked. And it works if you are patient enough to do it, but as I say, it was weird, but it was also kind of interesting playing this way. I always had my DS connected while playing something else, but doing like this, I managed to finish one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. Because I can say it now, I already knew it before finishing it, but now that I beat the game, I can confirm that Final Fantasy V is without a doubt among my favorite Final Fantasy games. And I should probably conclude the video with this statement, because for me, saying my favorite Final Fantasy, it's always very difficult because it's always between 6 and 9. I am super in love with both of them. Now that I replay 9, it's all coming back because I played on PS1. But now that I replay on the Vita, I say, man, this game is so good. So probably when I'll finish playing 9, I might say 9 is my favorite. But there's 6 that it's so good. But then I was always between, at the same time, after these two, which one is my favorite, 4 or 5? Because of course I'm an old school Final Fantasy gamer, lover, and fan. I grew up during those years. I mean, the Super Nintendo Final Fantasy are my games. I like the new ones. I played 13 for only 2 hours. It doesn't count. I don't have my PS3 with me here, so when I tried, I was like, oh, it seems good. Then I started to play Mass Effect, and fuck 13 and Mass Effect. But also playing 12 on PS2. I barely touched 10. I played 10-2 for a while. The PS1 Final Fantasy 7 and 8, I don't like them very much. So to me, Final Fantasy will always be, at least the Final Fantasy that I love, will always be the 16-bit era. So 4, 5, and 6. 9, it's a huge tribute to those, to that era of Final Fantasy for many reasons to me. And that's probably why, other than other reasons, why I love 9 so much. Because it reminds me of 4, 5, and 6 so much. But 5, now that it's finished, but since I started the game, was such a huge surprise that I didn't expect to like it this much, I think. I mean, because I really like 4, of course. 4 is a fantastic game. It's a great Final Fantasy. It has a much better story than 5. There's no comparison. There are many more characters, much more interesting than... As I said, the only interesting characters in Final Fantasy V mainly are Lena and Faris, and they're not like Cecil, Kain, Rosa, or Rydia. So, but even though traditionally, let's say traditionally, I'm more... The main reason why I love RPGs usually are story and characters. This game has a good story, simple but good. Okay characters, but the gameplay was just so good and addictive because I like this job system gameplays. I love the gameplay of Dragon Quest VI, even though it's not my favorite Dragon Quest. I really like the job system in Final Fantasy V, and combining all of this, I had so much fun playing this game that, yeah, at the end of the day, I prefer 5 over 4. But these are just details. They're all a great game, and at the end of the day, that's what matters. I mean, Final Fantasy 4, 5, and 6 are all fantastic, legendary RPGs that everybody who likes the genre needs to play this game. I mean, even though you prefer story-driven games or interaction between characters, stuff like that, and Final Fantasy V, I admit it. First thing I said, it's kind of weak in that department, but the story, it's okay. If it's not very deep, but it's okay. And the characters are okay. Again, it's okay in that department, but with such an amazing gameplay that you need to try it just for the not unique, but for the different gameplay compared to 5 and 4 and 6. So yeah, definitely one of my favorite Final Fantasies. It's an amazing RPG, and because of this, now I really want to play Dimensions, since from what I heard on YouTube, it's mainly a huge tribute to Super Nintendo Final Fantasy kind of gameplay, story and everything, with basically the same gameplay of Final Fantasy V, if not maybe a bit updated. I'm really curious about that. The idea that it's on the phone, I admit, I don't remember if it's both on iOS and Android, or it's only on iOS. I don't know, because my phone is Android, so I think it should be here. I have to check. I didn't look. And I don't mind too much, but at the same time, I still have to get used to it a bit. Like, I play Dragon Quest 1 and 2 on my phone. I don't mind it too much, but I still prefer the old-fashioned way. What can I do? I'm an old-fashioned guy in terms of games. That's the only way to play it. So, and I heard probably a sequel of Dimensions is coming. I will play the game because I really want to. We'll see. We'll see. I will play many more before Dimension. I mean, because this thing that it's on the phone, it's really kind of a turn off for me, but I really want to play it because I love this kind of gameplay. We'll see. So there you go. These are my main thoughts on Final Fantasy V. I don't know if I'm forgetting something, but my main personal opinions are these, and it was such a great experience playing and finally finished this game. As I said, it haunted me for years. Now I can finally move to other games. I started Etrian Odyssey yesterday. Soon I will restart probably Golden Sun. I already started the game, but I haven't played in years. And it's, as I said, fantastic Final Fantasy experience. If you like RPGs, you've probably played it because it's a great classic, actually. And nowadays there are plenty of ways to play it. Try it on, as I said, try it on the phone, because that's the remake that unfortunately Square decided to not put it on the 3DS. That would be great, a 3DS Final Fantasy V. But anyways, you can play on Game Boy Advance, you can play on PSN, you can play it on the phone. So there's plenty of way to play. There's no excuses. Play Final Fantasy V. Really, seriously, it's such a great game, and it really deserves more attention, even though it's famous. But it still has at least the reputation of the underrated one, even though everyone who played it said it's amazing, and I'm one of those. So thanks for watching, guys. Like always, I'll see you next time. Take care.